Welcome, everybody, to the Energy Advisors Show. Glad to have you with us today. I'm your host, Rex, that energy guy. Glad to have you along for the conversation. Really excited about today's guest, and I think you'll learn a lot of what's happening in the world of solar. But before we get there, of course, we want to thank our sponsors from Solar Energy Partners. If you're going to do solar, you've got to make sure you get the right team to do that with, the right partner. And I really like what they do. They service across most of the states in the United States, and they're really meticulous in getting not only your installation done, but getting you all the tax information, that kind of stuff. So let me connect you with them. If you're interested, go to my website, energyadvisors.today, fill out the form. I'll get you connected over to them. They're fantastic folks. All right. So today I've got a great guest coming on. We talk about all kinds of things, different angles. There's endless amounts of things to talk about in energy. And we've been doing a lot on solar lately, and that's okay because we've got a lot of mix coming. But today I've got a great guest that I'll let him do some introductions of his credentials because he's got a long list of them and doing some very interesting things. But I'd like to welcome to the program today, Gilbert Michoen. Gilbert, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Rex. It's great to be here and happy to chat with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, let's get things back. We don't have to roll back to whatever year you were born. I'm not going to guess on that. That would be sort of rude. But let me have you start off by telling our audience a little bit about yourself. Kind of your educational path, the courses you teach, what you're working on currently, etc. Let's learn a little bit about Gilbert before we start talking about policy and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, sounds good. So I'm originally from Maine. I went to school for math, actually. I wanted to be a baseball statistician. I was a big sports guy growing up. And about halfway through undergrad, I switched my major to economics. I was interested in environmental and energy economics, but it wasn't sort of my pointed interest at that time.
Okay.
And then what I ended up doing was I got a job after that. I worked at this big business journal, and the guy interviewing me sort of sat me down and said, "Hey, we cover manufacturing, food and beverage, different sort of industry sectors. What do you want to cover?" And I said, "I'll take a stab at sort of the energy and power industry. That sounds fun."
Hmm.
So my job as like a 22-year-old guy was to get CEOs of utilities and big energy companies, et cetera, on the phone and kind of talk shop with them. And it was actually really, a really great learning process. I was, learning about these cool wind projects they were building here and these solar projects they were building there, electric vehicles, all this sort of advanced energy technology. So it was really fun. That was my first job. I ended up actually leaving the job, and then I went to graduate school for a master's in economics and then a PhD in public policy, studying clean energy. And so, fast forward 6, 7 years later, now I'm an assistant professor of environmental policy here at Loyola. So I'm in Chicago, doing a lot of this work across the Midwest, frankly. I teach energy law and policy and environmental law and policy. Those are the two core classes that I teach here. I'm
Okay.
at the School of Environmental Sustainability. We just started this school about 2 years ago. So the university has this pointed interest in pursuing sustainability, teaching our students how to get out of the classroom and get engaged. And it's really fun to do this policy work and sort of teach students that, hey, you can go provide testimony, you can go to neighborhood association meetings, we can bring students down to the state house to do this kind of work. So I try to do very applied and engaged renewable energy research. I don't know if that's a good intro. Happy to talk more about.
No, that's great. It helps
Yeah.
us kind of that get a basis for our audience. So it's amazing what's happening, at least in my estimation. I mean, you see so many schools are going off sounds like a funny word, are have started or really expanding their environmental studies for sustainability, for advanced research in these areas. I think it's thrilling. And so it's great to see that really high level institutions are investing in this because it's such a big, impactful thing. Here in the Western cultures, and then we can talk about this a little bit, but in the West, um, we take energy for granted. We walk over to a
Mhm.
wall switch, we flip on a light, it's there, right? You don't think about how did it get there, how all of these things, how was it generated? delivery systems and, all the things that are happening. And now, because of what's happening in the political landscape, the information, the internet, there's a big focus on it. And so I think it's really interesting. Now, I understand that out there in Illinois, where you guys are at, there was a state level legislation that was passed in 2021 called the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, so the CEJA. Can you tell me a little bit about how that happened? Because there's a lot of states that are going in that direction or trying to. So, can you tell me what that entailed and what that's all about?
Sure. Yeah, this has been a really big topic of conversation just across the state, but also like in my classes and with my
Yes.
research group, right? Where um, we're acknowledging that states have a lot of power in the energy policy realm. This
Hmm.
is kind of like this federalist system that we have in the US. There's obviously a lot of power at the federal level too, but opposed to some other countries, for instance, I think we have a relatively weaker sort of federal or central government, and we're seeing states take a lot of leadership or maybe lack thereof, right, on these climate and energy type goals. So, yeah, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or as we call it, CEJA here, is really one of the most like ambitious and equity focused energy bills in the entire country at the state level. Just for some numbers to give you a sense of how people sort of feel about this and the bipartisan support that it had. So it passed 83 to 33 in the House and 37 to 17 in the Senate. So it had
Okay.
really widespread support off of many years of conversations around clean energy in Illinois and kind of a Midwestern leader, if you will, right?
Hmm.
As opposed to some of these other states that are maybe more laggards when it comes to clean energy policy in the region.
Sure.
So it's been around for about a couple of years at this point, Rex. This was signed into law in September of 2021,
Okay.
and it is a huge bill. It's almost like literally almost 1,000 pages. There's a
Wow.
lot of different pieces around renewables and transportation, et cetera. I'll give you a couple highlights.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say we might have to boil this down to a few smaller pieces.
Yeah. So, with respect to energy and sort of emissions, what CEJA does is it puts Illinois on a path to 100% zero carbon energy by 2050. So that includes nuclear, right?
Okay.
And it has more pointed benchmarks of 40% renewable energy by 2030 and 50% renewable energy by 2040. So
Okay.
here we're talking largely about the solar and the wind. And right
Sure.
now, to give you a sense of where we're at about 11, maybe 12% of renewable energy in the state. A lot of that is wind. We have a lot of big wind farms
Sure.
in sort of the southern and central parts of the state. So we got a ways to go to get to 40% by 2030, right? That's
Right.
6, 7 years from now. But we're in the process of deploying more projects. It also, from a transportation perspective, is trying to sort of pull back off of fossil fuels by expanding access to electric vehicles, charging stations, public transit, especially here in Chicago, right? And especially
Yeah.
for sort of historically and economically disadvantaged communities. Again, the word equitable is right in the act itself. So it has a lot of pieces that are focused on these types of communities and helping sort of disadvantaged folks not only have access to things like solar or an electric vehicle, but also to sort of give them jobs in these sectors, right?
Right.
Really
S-
important so that they're building sort of solar projects and energy efficiency retrofits.
Right.
Yeah.
I did have a question for you. Just recently, a couple days ago, I got a letter from our local power company here in Excel Energy, and they noted that our they did a breakdown of what our energy mix comes from. Colorado is currently at 35.4% wind, and our
Hmm.
solar is at 4.8. So you mentioned what Illinois has for wind. What's your solar footprint look like?
Yeah, I think it's about 1 to 2%
Okay.
solar at this point.
Yep.
And like I said, we're 11 or 12% renewables as part of our total generation mix.
Okay.
And I think the breakdown is about 10% wind and 2% solar, give or
Okay.
take.
That
Yep.
makes sense.
And we
Well,
have a lot of nuclear facilities in Illinois. That's a big thing. So we're 52% nuclear. We're like the biggest
oh,
nuclear state in the entire country.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact,
13% of the generation in of nuclear generation in the entire country comes from the state of Illinois.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's awesome. Well, and that's an area that's overlooked quite a bit. Okay, so anyway, I didn't mean to sidetrack you there too much, but so let's get back to CEJA just a little bit more and have you explain some of the highlights of this legislation.
Yeah, no doubt. So, like I said, there's sort of these benchmarks that we're trying to get to in terms of zero carbon and renewable energy. The transportation piece is really big. They have sort of instituted a rebate program for electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, the rebate, I believe, is about $4,000 for the purchase of an electric vehicle, and it scales down over time. So it's sort of incentivizing action in the shorter term, right? So it scales down to $2,000 in 2026 and $1,000 in 2028. This can be coupled with any sort of federal level
Correct.
rebates as well, right? So
Right.
it's providing sort of this additional nudge at the state level for folks to say, hey, you're incentivized at the federal level for this kind of investment already. We're going to kick in a few extra $1,000 as well at the state level. So hopefully, it's incentivizing people to purchase electric vehicles. Coupled with that, of course, Rex comes like charging stations, right? So we need to
Sure.
make sure that we're deploying this. And like I said, a lot of this bill is around workforce development, right? So
Okay.
a lot of the labor piece is important as part of this discussion,
Right.
and especially as it relates to equity, like I was saying, that what share of the jobs and wealth that are sort of generated by this new energy economy, if you will, is actually happening in sort of marginalized, disadvantaged communities. That could be anything from poor neighborhoods here in Chicago to sort of coal-fired power plants that have closed in Southern Illinois, and sort of energy communities that are left behind through that lens, right? And so they're sinking a lot of money and investment in this bill into workforce development. They're
Okay.
building, I think, 15 or so new workforce hubs and this pre-apprenticeship program to basically train and create this pipeline of energy workers. So they're going through this process of figuring out where do we put these things, who are the right sort of trainers that we need to get in these rooms, who are the people that need to be trained to work in sort of this advanced clean energy economy, and are doing a bunch of work right now to set up all these programs, which is really exciting, especially as someone myself that does a lot of this like economic and workforce type
So
modeling.
so with this legislation and that was passed in 2021, is the funding coming from just the general taxes? Did they create a new tax for this, or how's the funding working on it?
Yeah, it's we're going to pay for it as citizens of the state,
Okay.
but it's pretty marginal. I can dig out a number for you. I can't remember, but we're talking about an extra $5 or $10 on your electric bill or something to that extent, right? And so
Right.
you have to sort of weigh the proper trade-off of how much as a citizen or a ratepayer am I investing in this, and how important is that, and what benefits does it bring, and what benefits does it even bring from a broader perspective, like public health, like
Right.
reducing asthma and like healthcare costs in the state,
Sure.
and that type of thing. So some folks have sort of a narrow mind of, wait, this is going to raise my bill, or what am I paying for? And you need to sort of like model and understand and disseminate those streams of benefits that people will derive from it too, and say, hey, we're talking about $5 a month or something, but like look at all the like positive jobs and emissions benefits and all that kind of stuff we're going to realize.
Yeah, because we had legislation passed here in Colorado, and again, I don't have every state's research done and what they're doing, but just for an example's sake, the Public Utilities Commission approved, and the state passed a bill for electrification for transportation, where for each person's residence's bill, it's 37 cents a month, and for businesses, it's 97. And some people got upset, like you talked about that, but we've had these types of taxes and fees on our communications bills for decades. I mean, we've always paid these types of things, and so it is for the good, and it's for some people it's hard to look past that, but nominal 37 cents a month for a resident, and then it's going to help us build out the infrastructure for EVs. And so, I get that that's going. So in the let's talk a little bit about the job sector, because that really interests me. I recently did a very short episode talking about the expansion of solar manufacturing here in the United States. The top 5 or 7. People don't even realize there's now solar panels being built in 6 different states here in the United States. Some of these are foreign companies, but they have U.S. manufacturing. But the most important thing is those manufacturing jobs are here in the United States.
Yeah, exactly. The workforce piece of this is huge. Again, I mentioned I went to school for economics, and I've been sort of doing a lot of policy work, but also really studying the economic implications of the energy transition at large, right? And so, as someone who does a lot of this community engaged and applied research, Rex, like I'm working often with solar developers or wind developers that are trying to get projects cited and approved. And as part of that process, they need to sort of have economic and workforce impact studies done, right? To sort of try to quantitatively discern, hey, if we build this big solar farm in central Illinois or Western Ohio or wherever, what are we talking about in terms of like construction related job development and operations related job development? What are these folks paid in terms of wages? What does it mean in terms of tax impacts to these communities? All of these metrics are really important. So I do a lot of modeling on this end of things. And so, in terms of like types of occupations, right? Like clearly solar photovoltaic installers and things like that are like pretty obvious, I think, to a lot of folks.
Sure.
We need a ton of engineers. Engineering is probably the biggest sector where we're going to see job growth or like even job demand, right? And I'm talking about the entire supply chain, like from the PV manufacturers, and we have the engineers that are working on those types of sites or at those types of facilities, to the electrical engineers and other types of folks that you need to actually build these types of projects, civil engineers, software engineers. All of these folks are really important, and these are pretty high skilled and high paying jobs. And so oftentimes what we've seen is, there's sort of like skills gaps of interest where we're saying, hey, we need the supply and demand aren't really matching, right?
Right.
We need to sort of make sure that we have enough supply for this new demand of all these big clean energy projects that are getting built all across the country. And how do we make sure that we have folks that have the certification, that have, anything from an associate's all the way up to a master's degree in engineering, and offer them these types of jobs that are really good, sustainable, and well-paying jobs. This is a thing that every state is trying to sort of grapple with right now to make sure that we have a prepared workforce. So I don't know. This is just a really important thing that I think a lot of folks are thinking about. I think, as an academic, we have work to do too at four-year universities, community colleges, training centers to make sure that we're also being responsive to like the new changing demands of this sector and offering the relevant types of programs to potential students too, right? So
Right.
I'll stop there and see if you have any thoughts.
Well,
but yeah, this is just important. Yeah.
No, it's very important because let's just take solar, for instance, setting aside all the other sources of energy. And it's because we've been doing a lot on the podcast on solar lately. But if you look at the technologies to deliver solar, it's not just PV. You've got inverters, you've got meters, you have all kinds of two-way meters and things of that. I just spent an hour and a half this morning talking to some gentlemen that do some portable and the battery technologies and stuff. So the engineering jobs are going to be crazy because now you have an industry that has so much potential, so much growth in it. And if you just take the subcomponents of these systems and focus on them, there's enormous opportunities for improvement and enormous amount of jobs that it will take to deploy that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You think of a solar panel or a solar module, right? And you're talking about building a utility scale solar projects.
Yeah.
Think about the scale of racking systems and wiring and
Yeah.
all of this other equipment that you need, even sort of like truck transportation, right? And like all of these types of supply chain or related type impacts are really large.
Yes.
And even things like professional services. We need lawyers who understand energy policy and law. We need accountants to help out with these types of projects and folks that do the financial side of things.
Wow.
All of these people are going to be affected in a positive manner by this new deployment of projects, right?
Well, and it's another one to interrupt and add there is just the tax implications, because you go state by state, there are different various and incentives. There are different types of programs, like you talked about your EV incentives. I mean, here in Colorado, they just did a lottery system for electric bikes, so e-bikes. And if you were to qualify this, you had to have lower income for a household. Then it was a drawing, but it was tremendously successful. I mean, they blew it out as far as applications really quick. I think there was 25 million or 20 million dollars that were applied to this grant. And so
Wow.
the tax implications, because I can tell you this things, and you were correct when we started the conversation this afternoon. There's more going on local basis. Yes, we all have the federal stuff, but each state is at different various stages of technology adoption life cycle where policies are catching up. And so if I were to build something today, XYZ widgets that were in the industry, I'm going to have different impacts and tax ramifications almost state by state. And so the professionals to understand that, I mean, there's a lot of spaghetti to sort through for someone to understand what their what qualifications they need to meet for some of these programs, rebates. It's actually kind of a thrilling and exciting time, I think.
Yeah, I've been super plugged into this as someone who went to school for economics and studies energy policy, right? Like, what are the
Right.
tax implications and impacts? And they're sort of more hotly debated or contentious types of policies, right? Because they deal with government revenues.
Mm-hmm.
If we're offering a tax credit or incentive, those might be lost dollars, depending on what we're talking about, right? And so
Right.
not every politician likes to offer tax credits for renewable energy, but some states do it better than others, and some
Yes.
states offer more than others, right? And so these are really interesting conversations. I'm doing a lot more work now, Rex, on the other side of things, where we're talking about the positive property or sales tax impacts that are fed into communities from deploying these big renewable energy projects, right? And so what I've seen in a lot of sort of the Midwestern states or even a lot of the Southern states in the US is that the politicians, and I'm not saying that they don't care about emissions or environmental stuff, but a lot of them are just sort of piggybacking off of the economic and jobs and tax piece of this and saying, hey, this is an opportunity for us to see development here, broadly speaking, and to realize many, many millions of dollars of positive tax revenues that are going into rural communities that are helping them in the sort of post-COVID world, or maybe they're economically struggling for other types of reasons. Maybe they're coal impacted communities, right? And so, if you say, hey, we're going to build this utility scale solar project that's going to be 300 megawatts in community X, and this project is going to pay, I'm making a number up, but it's pretty reasonable, $1.5 million of property taxes per year into this community. And that's going to go directly to your kids' schools and public services and fire and police and all this kind of stuff. Then you got people that are like, well, I'm not sure if I want to stare at the solar farm, or I'm not sure about the energy or environmental piece of this. But hey, you got me sold on like the jobs and the tax piece of this. And
Right.
that's where you like are catching a lot of people, I think, on the economic development side of things.
Yeah. So let's pop over for a minute and talk about what CEJA is doing as far as the disadvantaged and sort of the equity piece, because I know we kind of touched on that in the beginning. So what are some of the specifics that are helping for disadvantaged?
Yeah, a lot of it is siting, right? Where are we putting solar? Where are we giving opportunities to folks? Where are we putting charging stations? And a lot of those types of things. And we're trying to sort of be mindful that we're not just building it in the more affluent neighborhoods, that we're
Right.
also building it in places where historically maybe people haven't had access
Mm-hmm.
to these types of technologies, people or areas where the pollution, or they haven't really seen sort of or they've sort of borne more of the costs, I guess,
Okay.
of historical energy generation, right?
Right.
And a lot of it, like I said, is about workforce development too. So
Okay.
we are building these workforce hubs. We're trying to basically train diverse populations, soon to be released incarcerated persons, etc., for jobs in solar and wind and energy efficiency, which I think is super unique and
Yeah.
super powerful. So that's really important. And yeah, I think it's about opening market access to folks that otherwise or historically haven't had access. And I think it's also giving them opportunities to work in this sector. I think those are the two biggest things that we're seeing as part of
Okay.
CEJA.
So, and with CJED also, does it provide any like grants or scholarships for people that are disadvantaged, or what's the angle on
Yeah,
that?
good point. I forgot to mention that. So there's a piece of this which is really unique and really cool, frankly, where they're offering scholarships to
Nice.
children of former coal economy workers, so coal miners, coal-fired power
Hmm.
plant workers, et cetera, that maybe have been impacted by the renewable energy transition in a negative way, where maybe you've lost your job or you've had to sort of reshuffle and work in some other type of sector, right? So the children of those folks, I don't know the amount, so don't ask me that, but I
Yeah,
know that
that's
they're
fine.
getting some sort of scholarship to go to universities and get trained in whatever they want to study. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think the public, there's so much education that needs to take place because when you see the political snippets here, oh, we're gonna build a energy economy, that it doesn't go any deeper than that. Oh, well, okay, and the first reaction is, well, everybody's going to build solar panels. Well, no, that's not everything. There's
Yeah.
an enormous amount that goes into this, and I look at this right now where energy is, I've spent 3.5 decades in tech before I started this podcast. And to me, this looks like some of the epiphany points in the marketplace with like technology adoption life cycles and things that have happened in the computer industry that were on these curves. I mean, the computer industry went from centralized computing to um, decentralized computing, distributed models, back to centralized to the internet and things like that. So I think that's my old man perspective here. I think that's a lot what's happening. And I think there's a lot of energy around that because there are so many opportunities. And you had software centers that popped up because of that. San Jose, Austin, Texas, Boulder, lots of places where these work hubs created, and it actually improved the lives of so many because those technologies were being researched and developed and the jobs were happening. So it's exciting that Illinois has jumped on that to make set an anchor to be able to say, hey, we want to participate in these workforce hubs.
Yeah, exactly. And a couple of things I forgot to mention, Rex, if I may,
Sure.
is that yeah, the nuance and the sort of the multiplier effects and sort of the deeper discussion around this stuff matters, right? And so we're talking about access and building clean energy projects and this type of thing. I think that from a political perspective, our elected officials are realizing that these are sort of carrots to drive other types of economic development too, right? We're
Sure.
talking about tech, we're talking about data centers, manufacturing facilities, Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc.
Sure.
Hey, come to our state, come to our city, set up your data center here. We'll give you this access to renewable energy. You have sustainability missions, you have renewable energy targets. You can come here, you can be 100% renewable powered, bring the jobs and the tax dollars with you, right? And so I think folks are starting to realize sort of these ancillary discussions
Right.
about, okay, renewable energy, okay, we set up this state level target or we have a local level goal or something, but there's a lot of other sort of unfolding pieces to this, which I think folks are starting to see now as this unfolds before our very eyes, which are really important. And the dollars that these types of projects are bringing to me communities are like incredibly impactful. One of
Yes.
my students just finished a thesis project looking at the property value impacts of utility scale solar. A lot
Hmm.
of folks have been sort of anecdotally saying, hey, you build this project in our community, our property values are going to go down. We're worried about what this means. We did modeling. We looked at 70 utility scale solar projects across the entire Midwest. We had thousands of observations and housing prices over time. And what we found was that it actually raised property values by a tiny bit because of the investment that this is bringing into communities. Communities that are seeing these types of wind and solar farms are actually getting a lot of tax revenues and sort of redeveloping their schools and, like I said, other public services. And
Hmm.
so they're actually driving a lot of really important economic development in these communities. And we showed that in that study. So I just want to throw a couple of other things at you. I thought that were kind of
No,
interesting.
that's it's really important for people to understand. We have a community here in Colorado in the metropolitan area that is now powering their all of their city operations with solar, and it's actually helping them attract people to that community. And this is a community that's kind of gone through a redevelopment, and it's exciting to see that happen. And it's bringing that, there's always a drag, so if you have, like we've been talking, if you have a centralized workforce and a hub of something, there's all the drag that goes all the way down to, service businesses and, churches and all these things that come along with it. That I'm glad people like you are looking at this, because a lot of people aren't understanding that drag is enormous. It's not just the engineering jobs or the assembly for the panel jobs. It's the entire drag that comes with it.
Exactly. And one other thing I'd like to talk about, if I can, is sort of
Sure.
we're talking about equity and inclusion, and also sort of like energy justice and democracy type issues, I think, that are
Okay.
really important as it relates to this, right? And so I have a big project right now that's funded by the solar office at DOE, the US Department of Energy. And
Okay.
we've been trying to sort of better discern how people are learning about clean energy, if they're getting engaged and involved with, again, we're talking about mostly utility scale projects for this research, where we've been interviewing landowners, we've been interviewing local officials, we've been talking to solar and wind developers. We're trying to understand sort of the process of how do you pick a community? How do you engage with the community? Does the community sort of engage back with you? Do they go to the hearing? Do they provide testimony? We're trying to sort of learn about how people are learning about these projects and how they're sort of helping make decisions, or maybe lack thereof, right, around citing and approval and sort of the social acceptance kind of pieces to this.
Hmm.
I've spent many years doing these types of interviews and talking to locals around this. I've spent many years writing about community solar projects too. I actually wrote my doctoral dissertation on community solar. And so we're trying to understand basically how people are learning about projects, how these projects might be providing access, equity, and inclusion, and the sort of economic and racial equity sort of pieces to this as well, right? Pollution burden
Sure.
neighborhoods, et cetera. And so as we're going through this transition toward adoption, how are communities getting involved and engaged and sort of driving the car, if you will, of building projects? I think that piece is incredibly important too, right? It's
Right.
not just, hey, a big investor on the electric utility is going to build this big project here, or a big developer is going to build a big project and sell it to Amazon or something. How do we make sure that we're all also engaging with locals and sort of acknowledging what they want as part of the clean energy transition?
Well, I know another aspect of this that people don't understand is at the policy at state level, in what's happening with our public utilities commissions. There is so much politics that are involved in this. The power companies need to make a profit that takes them 8 to 9 years to get a return on any new construction, and they're trying to suppress things. People are trying to keep the utility companies, out of installing solar on residences, as part of their.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of policy issues that just haven't surfaced. And I know, like here in Colorado, they have a cap regulation that the utility can call a cap on a particular development, neighborhood, zip code, whatever you want to define that cap, that says we don't want any more solar in there. And it's because they're losing their profit base. And so these issues need to be brought forth, because there's a struggle with I guess you would call it, the establishment in energy. And that's what's happening with some of the things that you're working on, these new developments, the equity, the justice, all of these things. It's like an old school versus the new school. It's very interesting, and I don't think people understand what's happening behind the scenes, because not all of that is interesting news.
Yeah, you're exactly right. This is, as someone who studies public policy, a lot of what public policy really is trying to understand some of those money, lobbying, power struggles, right, and the debates that are going on
Right.
in state legislatures and other places across the country. And so, yeah, electric utilities have sort of long lobbied against policies that encourage distributed PV, for instance, or rooftop solar, right?
Yeah.
It's directly sort of cutting into their profits. And if you think about, I think about sort of historical institutionalism. How have these like companies formed over time? You have had these utilities that have been around for 100-ish years. to provide electricity to Americans, they've largely been monopolistic, or I
Yes.
guess regulated monopolies type organizations, right? And so
Right.
um, I don't know if I want to say necessarily that utilities are anti-renewable or something, but I think they're anti-losing control. A lot of what they're doing is about maintaining control. So they'll cite things like, hey, all this renewable energy coming on the grid or other folks that are owning their own systems is going to cause grid complications, or something like net metering is like a form of a regressive tax, where it's taking a percentage. I'm sure you've talked about this on the podcast of folks that have solar and folks that don't have solar, and sort of what that looks like. But ultimately, what I think is that it's really a threat to corporate profits, right? And so
Exactly.
they're using sort of their money and their lobbying and corporate dominance in state legislatures all across the country, and donating to campaigns and being sort of very large campaign contributors to, in many ways, just sort of get what they want, right? And
Hmm.
they don't want to sort of lose control over this market and end up being just like a poles and wires company. They have these big generation assets. They have big coal and nuclear,
Yeah.
et cetera, power plants all over the country, and don't want to sort of lose sight of that.
Well, and here's something that I don't think the average person thinks about. We're coming full circle. Okay, so when you look at power and energy in the United States, well, it's anywhere in any developed country. We went from a distributed model where everybody did their own. So whether they burned wood, um, dung, coal, kerosene oil, or whatever, they were distributed. You basically created your own energy. Then we had the things come about of the turn of the century of the 1900s, and we moved from the DC to AC, and then we get into centralized. Well, now we got a centralized model. Well, okay. And that centralized model has existed for 100 or so years. And now they've got control of things. There's big money involved. And all of a sudden, if you have solar and wind available for everybody's home, you're moving to a decentralized to a distributed model again. So we've come
Mm-hmm.
full circle. We saw this in software, hardware, computers. I mean, it's the same thing. And so there is a lot of fear there. There is a lot of control issues. And so, it's not just a political left or right issue. It is an economics issue with the power companies, because they're not going to have this kind of control. I mean, as soon as my batteries are installed, I'm independent. I actually have flipped the relationship I have with my local utility. I sell them my extra energy right now. And so I'm no longer their customer, they're my customer. And here they've had for more than 100 years, not for me individually, but they've had a non-consensual relationship with me. I get to do business with you, like it or not. And now I flipped the table. So I think there's a lot of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt going on in the marketplace. I think that public policy is going to be important, because one of the fair or not criticisms of currently with like current solar systems and those things, it's kind of been referred to as Lexus energy. It's only affordable to those who are wealthy or have resources. And we're starting to see a lot more policy changes to help those who might be disadvantaged, or there isn't an equity situation, because right now, let's just face it, it's expensive. And so that kind of transitions me. And now, like, gone on this long tirade, I get on a soapbox here and there. But in a policy perspective, what policy solutions do you see working to help accelerate some of this energy transition? Because it's coming. It doesn't matter. It's going to, the economics are there to make it happen. So what kind of policy things do you see that can help accelerate that?
Yeah, I think, well, just as a first thought, policy is incredibly important. I've sort of framed my whole career around this,
Right.
where we have the technology to do the stuff now. We sort of need to influence and sort of show to our law and policymakers that this stuff is really important, and that we need the right sort of incentives and sort of political economy around energy, broadly speaking, to make this all happen, right? So
Right.
in the classroom, Rex, I'm always telling my students to get out, get involved, like vote, obviously, but take it many steps further. We're writing testimony and providing comments to DOE and EPA and all this kind of stuff. And this stuff really matters. So for folks that this wasn't obvious to, like, get out and get involved and wave the flag, because it does matter. Um, with respect to policy, you know, there's a lot of different types of incentives. I would say, as someone who's studied this for many years, financial incentives are really the most impactful drivers. And so we're talking about tax credits and
Sure.
rebate programs and those types of things, or even, low interest loans, something that impacts your finances. A very
Right.
simple example is, hey, I want to put solar on my roof. If I do this without policy, maybe it takes me 20 years to pay off the system, but wait a minute, let's fold in the investment tax credit that's offered at the federal level. Let's
Right.
fold in whatever state level financial incentives might be available. Boom, boom, boom. Now maybe my payback period is 9 or 10 years, right? So that's like a very easy example to understand. Like policy is having a huge change in terms of making these investment decisions, right? So I'd say financial incentives really work really well. Tax credits have been shown in many studies, including my own, to work really well. That's why we keep going through this system of, at the federal level, we've scaled down the ITC, the investment tax credit, over time, and then we renew it again back up to 30%. We've gone through this 2 or 3 times at this point, right? Tax
Right.
credits work. They are also sort of, as I mentioned before, more hotly debated or contentious because there's a money piece to it. And so not everyone wants to offer tax credits for clean energy, utilities perhaps themselves, or maybe more conservative leaning politicians, et cetera. So that is sort of the stickiness or the trickiness or the challenge with a lot of this. But I say strong financial incentives really
Yeah.
work.
Well, I have to raise my hand, guilty as charged. My incentive and first interest to do solar on my own home was financial. You know,
Yep.
I'm getting to a point where it won't be too many more years, hopefully. I don't know. We'll see a retirement. And I didn't want a utility bill during retirement, right? And so my driving interest was in looking at solar was financial. And I think it's important. Let's just call a spade a spade. People vote with their wallets, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The easiest way to set policy is to follow the money. And so, if you have something can be impactful, positive or negative, people are going to pay attention to that. And so I think I would agree with you. I think financial incentives are going to be the biggest gains. Now, of course, there are people out there who, I don't want to upset anybody or make anybody cheer that have 100% green agenda. Well, that's great. But I think the impact is going to be more widespread when it's financial. So, you're really drilled into this as far as the public policy and these types of things. What do you see happening over the next, let's say, 5 years? I mean, I don't ever ask anybody to look past that because who knows what the world's going to be like, heck, maybe even in 3 years. But do you have any insights on what you think is going to be really impactful over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I get asked it a lot, though. I think we're going to continue to see fights at the federal and state level around clean energy policy, and these things shift back and forth with
Sure.
whatever party's in office, right? So right now we're doing a lot of great stuff with the Inflation Reduction Act and the IRA and a lot of these other sort of big federal acts that are investing a lot in the grid and renewable energy and all of this great stuff that we've been talking about. This could be flipped on its head, right, with the next election cycle. And so these are things to be mindful of. What I get really excited about, Rex, is sort of smaller scale community and local innovation
I
and
was
maybe how
about to
that
go there.
bubbles up the other way, right?
Right.
Top down federal or state policy that offers different incentives that encourages folks to make decision A versus B or what have you. I'm really interested in sort of the folks that live in rural communities, the folks that are members of electric co-ops or municipal utilities, the folks that have just figured out ways, oftentimes uniquely independent of policy, to do what they want to do. Loophole programs, crowdfunding programs. How can even our neighborhood do project X, right? And that stuff is really powerful because we're seeing that innovation sort of bubble up into models that can be deployed elsewhere and that oftentimes even turn into policy down the road, right?
Right.
Hey, look at how these communities built these community solar gardens. This is really cool. The state doesn't even have community solar enabling legislation necessarily, but these communities have figured out ways that they can build local solar projects and check some of the boxes of community cohesion and saving on their energy bills and getting people involved from a civic engagement perspective. And then that sort of snowballs into other communities as sort of this adoption snowballs. And then maybe, it actually works its way into policy where someone at the state level might say, hey, look at all these like really cool projects that are going on. If we push this lever just a little bit harder and adopt formal enabling legislation, we're going to see all these job benefits that I've been talking about. We're going to see all these emissions and environmental benefits in our state. We're going to see these tech companies maybe want to come into our state. And so I think that actually a lot of the great action is happening at the local community level and sort of maybe bubbling upwards toward policy. So I'm really paying attention over the next 5 years to answer your question at what cities are doing, at what rural communities might be doing, at what small electric co-ops might be doing, and how that might actually sort of turn into policy, if you will, down the road.
That's exciting. I throw this out because it's honestly what's in my heart. I honestly believe, and maybe I'm just too Pollyannish, and maybe now people aren't even old enough to remember what that phrase means, but I honestly think most people want a cleaner environment. Honestly think people would love to have as close to free energy as possible and 100% renewable, because nobody wants a dirtier planet. I believe that. I guess the question that comes to bear is, how do we get there? And there are people who have all kinds of ideas on how we get there and at what pace. And unfortunately, some people get so stuck in their view of that it makes it become an all or nothing type thing. And so I just don't believe anybody is rotten to the core. I think everybody wants a cleaner planet. Just the question is how we're going to get there.
Yeah.
And so public policy plays such a big role in that, because we need to do some of these things for the good, for talking about funding different aspects through utility fees or taxes and those types of things. And so, it's not an easy answer, but I really honestly believe, regardless of anybody's political leanings on all kinds of other issues, that at their heart, if you were to sit down at the kitchen table and talk to them, my grandfather was a rancher who lived out in a community of less than 1,500 people, and he was doing solar 40 years ago. And it's because he actually depended on the earth. He counted on the weather, he counted on the rain, that kind of stuff to make his living. And he always talked about how it was important to conserve. And, he was doing recycling back way before recycling was anything interesting. So I don't know. I believe in the good, and I think that public policy needs to be brought further, because there is a lot of important impacts that it can have. And I think it's hard in this industry right now because there's so many things going on. And like I said, misinformation or whatever you want to call it. But people need to understand that how impactful it is.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of it is ideological. A lot of it is I lived in Appalachia for a while and like working in these communities. A lot of it is just sort of family and history traditions of my grandfather was a coal miner and my father was a coal miner kind of thing, right? And so it's interesting to see how we're moving forward, but the sort of the stories and the anecdotes and the political economy, if you will, around this stuff matters a lot. I think that we're seeing it from a lot of different angles. You have sort of the environmentalists or the more affluent folks that have had solar on their roofs for 20 years that are always into this, right?
Right.
But we're seeing this really interesting movement, Rex, of like the hardcore libertarian community, if you will, in the southern states that are sort of just saying, I want to put solar on my roof, and I don't think that the government or my utility or anyone should tell me what I can or can't do on my own private property, right? And so you're having those folks that are installing solar too. Maybe it's from a financial perspective to save money. Maybe it's just from a government, anti-corporation kind of perspective that is driving them to do this to some extent as well. And so it's not just the lefty, affluent, suburban white person that is doing this stuff. Everyone's doing it now from whatever angle that is sort of relevant to their story or their discussion. And so I think that offers a lot of promise to how we see this unfold across the country.
Well, you're talking to somebody who counts himself as a mainstream normal guy. I don't have any extremes in any directions. I looked into it I've always been the person who's believe in conservation and those types of things, but I wasn't extreme in any direction. And so, you're talking to a guy that's probably just the guy that's woken up recently and said, "Hey, there's better ways to do this." And I'm really excited about doing a lot of research about residential wind, and now thanks to the affordable Inflation Act, nobody can prevent you from putting wind on your house too. So I don't want to be obnoxious and have a 40-foot blade or spinning on the top of my roof, but there are some great solutions that are coming there. So let me skip over to, because I know we're get on with your day, but I connected with you through the American Solar Society, and I wanted to ask you what you're doing with American Solar Energy Society and the role that you're playing there, real quick.
Yeah, good question, and thanks for bringing that up. So, ASIS, the American Solar Energy Society, is a large national nonprofit organization that largely focuses on solar, as the name would indicate, but really a lot of these other sort of clean or advanced energy technologies. And so they do a lot of different things, educational programs and webinars and convenings, et cetera. There's a big annual conference every year. It usually rotates between Boulder, Colorado, and some other cities. So we're actually going to be in Washington, D.C. next May, which is super exciting, especially as someone who does policy work. And I actually serve as the policy divisions chair for ASIS. So ASIS has different sort of technical divisions. Sometimes it's focused on different technologies, sometimes on sort of a discipline or a topic, right? So there's an energy economics division, there's a sustainability division, et cetera. And there's a policy division at ASIS. So I've been chairing the policy division there for probably 4 or 5 years at this point.
Right.
My job doing that is to share the research I'm working on, right? Share the modeling and the policy sort of analysis that I'm working on to sort of show what works and how other folks in other states can sort of learn what the leader states are doing and maybe mimic those types of policies, and to do that sort of education and mobilization as well. Yeah. So I help run some webinars. I always bring teams of students to the conference and to a lot of the events that ASIS is doing. And I field questions from folks across the country that are saying, how does this tax credit work? What's going on with the IRA? Am I eligible for the investment tax credit, the ITC, if I live in Puerto Rico? I answer sort of these like technical assistance kind of questions, which is really fun.
Well, I will give my own testimony for the American Solar Energy Society. They're located in my backyard here, just over the hill in Boulder, but it's a phenomenal resource for all kinds of educational purposes. And I don't think people understand you can actually have an individual membership that just unlocks Pandora's box. I mean, it's drinking from a fire hose if you're a novice, but what's nice is you get the updates and things. And so I've read some of your stuff there. I think it's an enormous resource. And again, solar's not the only solution, but they are involved with so many green topics. And so I will give out a shout to people, if they're just even mildly interested, to get an individual membership. It doesn't cost much.
Yeah, it's a great society, a great association with a lot of great people. There's a ton of organizations, of course, across the country that are plugged into this. What I really like about ASIS is people really care. They're really passionate about this stuff, and you have a lot of practitioners. Yeah. So I'm a part of a lot of societies that are other academics, right? Or, maybe government officials or something like that. What I like about ASIS is you have industry folks, you have folks that are on the ground doing these projects. You have a lot of folks that are just homeowners with solar on their roofs, and they want to get the good word out and get involved. And so it's really fun for me to work with those types of stakeholders, right? To learn about what they're learning on the ground and how can my work, where sometimes we're doing high level stuff or we're running these big, quantitative models that are hard to understand or something, how does it actually help inform what folks are doing on the ground? And so it's really fun, I think, for me to be engaged with them.
That's great. Well, I appreciate your time today, Gilbert. It's been fantastic to get some insights from you and have this conversation. I'm going to have you back. I mean, I have to. There's so many more things to talk about here. I know we only touched the tip of the iceberg, but I appreciate your time, the work that you're doing, the things that you're teaching your students, and the impact you're making. I think together, again, I'm not Mr. Pollyanna all the time, but I really believe that if we were to put our heads together and work on these things, that transitioning to cleaner source of energy is a reality. And I'm excited now because I, with doing virtually very little, I've already made myself independent of my local power company, and now they're my customers. So I really appreciate what you're doing. And so, any final remarks you have for us today for our listeners?
Yeah, I'd sort of echo what I said about, getting involved and engaged, right? I do this as an academic. It's not necessarily even part of my job, to be frank. My job is to teach my classes and to publish research papers and to do service and advising and that type of work.
Okay.
What I think is kind of unique for me as a professor is I sort of call myself a pracademic, right? I'm doing this practical applied work as an academic. So working with the policymakers, working with the folks on the ground, working with different stakeholders, folks that are in power, serving on state energy commissions, doing that kind of stuff to sort of help make a real world difference. Because I think that's how I'm having an impact as an academic. I'm running the models and I'm writing the papers, and I'm objective, right? I'm a scientist, but I'm informing the folks that work in environmental advocacy coalitions and that work for the clean energy industry, and sort of equipping them with the data and the tools to make their arguments for better policy or see these projects come through the pipeline. And so that's just kind of my little spin on how I'm getting involved in making a difference. And I think everyone has that right, or even duty, if you'd like, to get out there and sort of, sounds cliche or cheesy, but to fight for what you believe in, right? Like that's what our democratic system in many ways is framed on. And so if you care about clean energy or any other sort of topic for that matter, go out and sort of wave your own flag and get involved. It makes a huge difference.
So if you could, just because I know there'll be some people interested in, could you give out your research group website so they can follow you there? And I know you're on social media, so it looks like you're probably on LinkedIn, and I guess it's X now. We always have to, get the updates. But could you share real quick your website information?
Yeah, I have a research group. I got 9 or 10 students that work with me. It's called the Michoen Energy Policy Research Group. It's a very long URL, but that's what it is. So it's MICHAUD is my last name, and then energypolicyresearchgroup.com. So you can follow all my projects and work that I'm doing there. And yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn and X or Twitter. I'm on there too. And I try to be pretty active in sharing my work with the community. So always happy to make new friends, connect with me, and always happy to chat with folks. Yeah.
Well, glad to have you today. I look forward again having you on. And so, folks, I think we'll call this a wrap for this episode. Thanks for tuning in. And if you are participating on any of the video platforms, don't forget to subscribe. Check out our partnerships. Those are growing by the week. We're excited to be a voice in this industry, and our goal is to be that place where you can get the facts, the information, and stay connected. So until next time, I just always say, make it a great day. Thanks for your opportunity to tune in.